Okay, good morning again. I hope you had a good weekend, and welcome to the next section of this course, our second of three sections, which is going to focus on ethics and justice, very different topics than the first section, certainly not less important, perennially important to us in every generation, and these are pretty much internal concerns of philosophy, and of course there are applications as well to many other areas. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of ethics to begin with. I'll show you a slide that's in your folders and give you a brief overview, and then we'll begin our first reading in this section, and that will be Aristotle from his Nicomachean Ethics, very famous work and still a very relevant one. So remember that your first essays are due next Monday. I'm giving you this extra week to do that. I see a question on Descartes. I'm going to answer questions about the first set of readings after this class finishes at 10:45. I'll stay in this room with you, and if you have any questions about any of the earlier readings on which you're writing your essays, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Okay, so stick around if you can, and I'll deal with the question on Descartes and anything else that comes up. But for now, we're going to spend this time doing new material. Okay, that's our game plan for today. And so here we go. The first thing that I want to consider with you are the possible meanings when we talk about ethics. What are we really talking about? So allow me to share an overview with you that hopefully will give you some clearer idea of what we intend when we talk about ethics. So let me share the screen. Somebody's saying, what essay due Monday? Well, the first three assignments is due next Monday. If you are asking this question, it's possible that you have not been paying any attention to either the classes or the recordings that are asynchronous. This was assigned some time ago. And you better stick around after class, okay? If you want to know what's due next Monday, you better stick around and get some detail. This is the work on which you're being evaluated in this term, okay? So it's rather late in the day for you to be asking this question, but better that you ask it today. Well, I can't help being, there are going to be confusions. Those of you, I will, that's partly my fault, I'm sorry. Those of you who are in my section of 80 students, section M, your first assignment is due Monday, okay? Those of you who are not in section M and are having breakout lectures with other instructors, then you may not have an assignment due next Monday. I apologize, I get confused by this too, all right? So those in section M, your essay, your first essay is due Monday. You already know this. Those of you who are asking me what's due Monday, if you're not in my section M, then your evaluations are going to be done by by your own instructors. Okay, I'm sorry if I scared you. Okay, you scared me back. All right, I'd forgotten that I'm talking to a much larger group than my own 80 students in section M. This is the plenary. All right, so everybody relax. All right, it looks like we're back on the same page. Sorry for the speed bump. All right, let's go on. I'll share the screen with you. We'll talk about ethics. Okay. And here's the little PDF that gives an overview of ethics. Firstly, most people may not be aware of this, but I'll just say it's important that ethics and aesthetics, maybe some of you have heard the word aesthetics, ethics and aesthetics actually share a common root, namely axiology, which is a theory of values. Why? The common denominator is our valuation, primarily our valuation of goodness. We talk about good deeds and we talk about good books, right? So the question is, what makes a deed a good deed? That would be a question for ethics. If we ask what makes a book a good book, or what makes a song a good song, or any work of art, what makes a culinary dish a good dish, that would be an aesthetic question. But what they share is this valuation of goodness, and we have different criteria, yes, by which we're going to declare a deed to be good or declare some work of art to be good. But the common root is axiology, which is a theory of values. We're going to look at that branch that we call ethics. And there are the central question, what is good and what makes something good, is indeed for us the main question of ethics. And we're going to see a variety of philosophers, of course, answering it in different ways. By now you realize that no two philosophers have agreed about anything. So we're going to look at some very important, historically important views on what it means for something to be good or someone to be good. And the three main questions of ethics are what is good, what is right, and what is just. Okay? Those are our three main questions. Supposedly, if we know what goodness is, then we can act rightly. And in a society, presumably where most people are trying to be good and to act rightly, then we would end up with some kind of a just state of affairs. That's why these questions are related. But we're always going to start with what is good. Now, here are different kinds of ethics, and there's more than one way of doing ethics. So I want to be clear with you about what we're doing here. We could, for example, consider descriptive ethics, and that, by virtue, by what it means, is describing different systems of ethics without making any value judgments about them. For example, if you were a cultural anthropologist and you were studying different ethical systems of different societies, then you would be doing descriptive ethics. You're merely describing what a given group of people deems to be good, right, and just. That's descriptive. Then beyond that, one could do prescriptive or normative ethics. Those are usually synonyms, prescriptive or normative. And as the first word suggests, this kind of ethics prescribes something. And both religious and secular systems are going to answer these main questions. All religions have ethics embodied in them. All religions are going to tell you what is good, what is right, and what is just. We are going to study secular ethics by contrast in this section of the course. But again, all systems of secular ethics must deal with this, what is good, what is right, what is just, but not necessarily with recourse to religious explanations. We're going to look at secular philosophical answers to these questions. But either way, whether it's a philosopher or a representative of a religion who is prescribing certain deeds as being good or the avoidance of certain deeds as being bad, then those would be prescriptive systems. We're not doing that either. We're going to take a step beyond that and do what I'm calling comparative ethics, where we evaluate, compare, and contrast different prescriptive answers to these questions. That's our focus, okay? So we'll be doing comparative ethics. In other words, we're going to look at some different ways in which these three questions can be answered, and we'll be comparing and contrasting them. And again, with respect to secular ethics only, not religious ethics. You could also go beyond this in a fairly new field, well, new not anymore, but 30 or 40 years it's been since applied ethics has emerged as a growth industry in philosophy. It's very important. And applied ethics applies various ethical theories to the attempted resolution of moral problems and ethical quandaries that occur in the practice of professions. For example, we have engineering ethics, environmental ethics, biomedical ethics. These are all very important branches which attempt to apply some of these moral theories to solving problems that come up. And problems come up every day in most professions. So there are codes of ethics and there are case studies which endeavor to help people to solve these particular problems rooted in the practice of professions. We're not going to touch on that. We do have in our department a very experienced applied ethicist. Professor Bluestein teaches biomedical ethics. Some of the other adjuncts teach it as well. But we're doing comparative ethics. Is this clear? Everybody clear so far? Yes? All right.
Yes.
So, yes? Was there a question? Everyone's clear?
No.
Okay, thank you. So one more slide, and then we'll dive into Aristotle. All right. I'm missing normative ethics. No, it's here, prescriptive or normative ethics. I'm using these terms synonymously. Okay, same meaning for us. All right. Next slide just gives you a bullet point of some main ethical systems And everyone has certain strengths and weaknesses. If there were a perfect system of ethics, perhaps we'd all be following it. But in any case, every system that we're going to look at has some definite strengths and also some definite weaknesses. So that's my contention, that they all have strengths, but they all have weaknesses. So none of them is absolutely perfect. And at the end of the day, this part of the course may cause you to revisit some of what you think is good, right, and just. And I hope it does. I mean, you may make you change your mind in some ways, or it may make you more firmly convinced of what you already believe, but hopefully will give you perhaps better reasons for believing what you believe about ethics. So in any case, we're going to look at these main systems. Virtue ethics is where we start, and that asserts that goodness, generally speaking, is a byproduct of exercising virtues. So if you want to be a good person, then you would exercise virtues. If you exercise vices instead, then you'll end up being bad. And that is what Aristotle will tell us in a very ingenious and original way, which is why we're still studying him. He was one of the leading virtue ethicists and gave us a really unique way of figuring out how to calibrate our moral compasses. We'll be looking at him this week. Deontological ethics, from the Greek word deon, meaning duty, asserts that the rightness or wrongness of actions is not a function of the goodness or badness of their outcomes. Rather, it's a function of your intentions. Good intentions are the main thing in deontology, or following the rules are the main thing in deontology. And the outcome is really secondary importance. We'll look at Kant as the outstanding deontologist for Western philosophy in any case. Then there's teleological ethics. Well, teleology, another Greek word, means a goal or an aim. Okay, telos is a goal or a purpose. So teleological ethics asserts that the rightness or wrongness of actions is a function of the goodness or badness of their outcomes. So in other words, if you got a good result, then you did the right thing. That's just, the opposite in a way. It's in opposition to deontological ethics, which is not concerned with outcomes, whereas teleological ethics is concerned with outcomes. And we'll look again at John Stuart Mill later in this section as an outstanding exponent of that view of ethics. We're also going to look at Plato, who's very unique and very important, and was actually Aristotle's teacher. But we're going to take Aristotle first because he's a little bit simpler to tackle. And Plato thought that goodness results from apprehending the pure form of the good, and we'll talk about that next week when we look at him. Then we have more contemporary theories. Ethical egoism is the claim that everyone ought to pursue their own self-interest. In other words, you should do whatever is right for you, and someone else should do whatever is right for them. And so there's no overarching system that compels all of us. There's just a question of each one's acting individually out of their own self-interest, which if we allow that to be our guiding light, we may, as some of you probably already understand, will lead possibly to anarchy. So there's a resolution to this, which is given by Thomas Hobbes. And utilitarianism is John Stuart Mill. Mill's brand of teleological ethics is utilitarianism. Okay, Alejandra, good question. We'll get to utilitarianism with Mill. And finally, psychological egoism is the claim that we're made by nature to be self-interested, and that's why we get into conflict. So basically, Thomas Hobbes gives us a philosophical account of the social contract. He's not the only one, but he's one of the most important ones. And he gives us a way out of this problem that we land in, which is everyone's pursuing their self-interest, which leads to constant conflict. A way out of that is to resolve that problem. But Hobbes and Freud both, Hobbes philosophically and Freud psychologically, later than Hobbes, of course, both believe that we are psychological egoists. That is, that we're by nature ethical egoists. So we have a real problem to deal with. And indeed, quite plausibly, we do. So those are just touching on some of what we're going to cover. All right, that's what's on the horizon for us. And we'll get there. Each one will be a different week. We're going to start with Aristotle, and then Plato, and then Hobbes, and then Kant, and then Mill. So in the next 5 weeks, we'll cover all of these views. And all of the readings are in your, except for Hobbes, all the readings are in your textbook. So we'll be, and I've given some extra readings as well for Mill And I put the Hobbes reading in your Google Drive folder. Okay, so anyway, 1 week at a time, we'll get there. So that's basically the overview, okay? So let's get in. Are there any questions about that? If not, we'll move right into Aristotle and his virtue ethics. Okay, everybody's good to go? Is that a yes? Okay, thank you. So let's then have a look at Aristotle. And that's in the Nicomachean Ethics, is one of his 2 books on ethics, which he wrote for his son Nicomachus, and it's the one that is more often studied. Aristotle was, and still is in some ways, a very important philosopher. He did a lot of different things. He wrote about 22 books, and we're not studying all of them. His books on physics and biology and so forth were obviously outmoded by centuries of science, so his scientific theories are not relevant anymore, but his ethical theories still are, interestingly enough. His politics, his economics, his ethics, and his logic. Very, very good logician. So we're still teaching all of that after more than 2 millennia. He got a lot of things right and was one of the most famous philosophers in the West. Also had a very large influence on Islamic philosophy. And that's an interesting sidelight too. So let's go to his ethics. Let me pull up the screen, and we'll start with Virtue Ethics by Aristotle. Just bear with me while I share this other screen with you. All right, so everybody sees this, right? This is the reading from your books, and it's in Virtue Ethics is the name of the section, and we're reading from a book called, as it says here, Nicomachean Ethics. That's the name of the book, for those of you who may be looking outside. And I'm just covering extracts here. This is not the whole book, but you're getting some extracts from the book, and we'll go over them. He was a great student of Plato, and we're going to see by the end of 2 weeks why he was not named the successor to Plato. Plato founded the academy, and the university that Plato founded, called the academy, from which we have academe today. That word is still applied now. And basically, Aristotle was his student for quite a number of years, but ended up diverging from his teacher on some very important points of ethics and of other things. So for that reason, he was not named the successor of Plato, and he had to found his own school called the Lyceum, which he did. But he learned a lot from Plato, and there are both agreements between Aristotle and Plato, and also some very strong disagreements. So we'll be looking a little bit at that as we unfold this. But we're focusing on the ethics. Now, Aristotle believes primarily that everything we do, every art, at least in every science, is aimed at some good, at some notion of what we call a good. It's not yet clear what good is, but for example, as he knew back then, and we still would agree today, that the end or the aim of medical art is health, right? That's the point of medicine, is to restore health. The art of shipbuilding has a purpose also, which is to build a ship, right? So you could see in this sense that everything we do has some goal or some end, right? There's some purpose, in other words, to what we do. And Aristotle is merely at this stage pointing that out to us. So what he would like to ask, and where this inquiry leads him, is to a really interesting question. Is there anything we do for its own sake, in the sphere of action? Because he's talking about practical philosophy. For him, ethics is a very practical matter. For Plato, it's contemplative. And that's one of the differences already that's going to divide them. But Aristotle's already telling us, look, medicine is an art, but it's an action. People do things to practice medicine. Shipbuilding is an art, but it's an action. People do things to build a ship. And so in this human form and in human society, we are compelled to act. We're creatures of action. So we inhabit a sphere of action, not only of contemplation. And so he's asking this really interesting question. Is it true that in the sphere of action, there is some end, meaning some goal, that we wish for its own sake and not just for the sake of something else. So that's a way of distinguishing. If I can get back to the chat, I don't see how to open that from here. I could distinguish, and I'll do it verbally. We can distinguish between things that are inherently good and things that are instrumentally good. So something that's inherently good, we would wish for its own sake, because it's good or valuable to us in itself. Something that's instrumentally good, we would wish because it's good to get something else. It itself has no real intrinsic value or inherent value, but it's useful instrumentally as a tool or as a means to some other end, yes? Hence we say that it has instrumental value. Is that clear? So there's a fundamental distinction between inherent value and instrumental value. Was there a question?
Yes, sorry, would you mind repeating the definitions for inherently good versus instrumental?
I'm sorry, I don't hear you at all well. Could you speak up, please?
Yeah, would you mind repeating the definitions for inherently versus instrumentally good?
Yes, I'm going to ask you for some examples. Something that's inherently good is something that we value for its own sake. Something that's instrumentally good is something that we value because it helps us get something else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, you're welcome. Is that clear?
Yes.
So could somebody give me an example of an instrumental good? Something that's instrumentally good is something that we think is good because it leads us to something else. We use it literally as a means to some other end. What would be an example?
Going to school.
I'm sorry, I still can't hear you well.
Going to school.
Could you enter it in the chat room? Money.
She said going to school.
Going to school. Okay, well, there's a big question. So, I mean, I would tend to agree with you, having been through the process, that your degree, hopefully you're all going to get a degree out of this, and that degree will have some instrumental value, right? Because getting a degree will help you get what? A job. Oh, in capital letters. Yes, so you're okay, hopefully. Keep a good thought and help you get a job, or help you get another degree, right? If you want to go on to graduate
or a good career.
Or a career, right? So you see that a degree is instrumentally good because it's going to help you to get to the next stage or to get something else that you want, right? Okay, so that would be an example of something that's instrumentally good. As a professor, I would also hope, I cannot forbear from adding that I hope it also has some inherent value to you. I hope that some of the things you're learning in the process of getting a degree will have some inherent value to you. In other words, they'll be valuable in and of themselves. But I do agree that getting a degree is something, you know, a degree has instrumental value. Money, somebody said, yeah, Julia, money. Sure, money gets us something else. Money has no inherent value at all, actually. Money is an instrument for getting other things, right? It's a currency, a means of barter. If you're on a desert island, a bunch of money is not going to help you very much. It would have no inherent value at all because there's nothing you could buy with it, right? I mean, no instrumental value at all. On a desert island, it would be worthless. So it can't be inherently valuable. On a desert island, however, your favorite book, you know, your reading list, your top 10 reading list or your top playlist might be extremely valuable to you, inherently so, all right? So you want to consider that. And that's a distinction Aristotle is correct to draw our attention to. So what he's interested in clearly is what is going to be inherently good, not instrumentally good. He recognizes a lot of things are instrumentally good, but he's after the inherently good things that he deems more important to us. He's just asking at this stage, is there anything that's inherently valuable to us? Is there something that we really want just for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else? And that's a really interesting question. He's going to answer it very shortly. And he talks about different kinds of pursuits that we conceive for ourselves that might be good or might lead to happiness. And some people are caught up only in a life of pleasure. Some people seek pleasure as an end or as a good. We generally call that hedonism. If you're only after pleasure, I'll type that in. You may know the word. People who believe that the pursuit of pleasure above all else is the main thing, then that would be hedonism. What does instrumentally good mean? Okay, I'll explain it once more. Something that's instrumentally good is something that's good because it gets you something else. So it lacks, it may lack inherent value altogether, but it's good for something else. It's a tool or an instrument that we use for a further purpose, for the attainment of a further goal. Okay, that's instrumentally good. All right. A staircase is instrumentally good because it gets you up and down, it gets you to the next floor, down, to a lower floor. A staircase is instrumentally good, literally, because it's a ladder that takes you up or down, for example. All right. And you can look these things up. Again, if you look up inherent versus instrumental goods, you look them up in any dictionary of philosophy or encyclopedia of philosophy, you'll get further explanations with examples. So I've just gone over this. So knowledge is inherently good, but a degree is instrumental. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. If you think that knowledge is inherently good, yeah. A degree is instrumental because it gets you knowledge. That would be exactly right, Ahmed. But also, a degree would be instrumental because it might get you a job or get you an entry, get you pre-qualified to do something more advanced, the next degree, or the professional school that you want to enter, and so forth. So knowledge is inherently good, but a degree is instrumentally good. It's a very, very, I think that's a great way of putting it. Okay, good for you. So there are 3 different kinds of life, Aristotle says, that we could lead. The sensual life, which is a life of seeking pleasure as an end. The political, he calls it, which is a life seeking honor. And thirdly, the life of thought. And that is, according to Plato, Plato agrees, but not entirely, as we'll see, because for Aristotle, virtues still have to be practiced, even if we lead a contemplative life. He definitely thinks that the life of contemplation is in some ways inherently superior to the life of pleasure, seeking pleasure of the senses, and the life of seeking power. We would say political means also money, power, honor, those things. So you want to have a bridge named after you one day. You're seeking honor. You want power over others. That's another facet of political life. And the life of thought, he believes, is inherently better. But remember, we're still embodied beings who need to act. So this is not going to be, for Aristotle, any clue to ethics, actually. But it is a clue to virtue. The life of thought will lead us to think about the virtues. So characteristics of the good is very important, because here he enunciates the answer to the question he raises: is there anything we desire for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else? So Karina asks, inherently and instrumental will be adapted according to our needs. Not exactly, Karina. Something that's inherently good is something that, I'll just repeat, something that's inherently good is something that we value for its own sake and not for the sake of something else. Something that's instrumentally good we value because it's useful for getting something else and not just or not at all for its own sake. Okay, so please digest these. I know these are new terms, but they're very important. Okay.
Professor?
Yes.
But wouldn't that mean that everyone will give the each thing its own value? Wouldn't it mean that every single one of us is going to, decide whether something is inherently good or not, for us at least?
Yes, that's quite possible. In certain ways, that's entirely possible. But Aristotle is going to tell us that there's something overarching that we would all agree is inherently good. And the most important thing, now he's going to ask what's more important than all the other things that are inherently good. Julia asked, can nature be inherently good? That's really interesting. I love nature and I love to walk in the forest. And when I'm walking in the forest, I find myself quite happy to be there. And it's not like I need the forest for something else, right? If I needed to burn a lot of wood or make a lot of paper, I'd start chopping down trees. And then the forest would be instrumentally good because it provides wood. But when I walk through it, just appreciating its natural beauty, there's nothing I want from it. I'm just happy to be in it. So that would be for me an inherent good. Excellent example. So Maciel is now talking about to achieve happiness. And this is what Aristotle is saying in this highlighted passage. He says that happiness is actually the thing that everybody wants above all else, and in fact has the most inherent good, because we never desire it for the sake of something else or for a means to something else. Just to quote Aristotle, it's highlighted, for happiness, we always desire for its own sake and never as a means to something else. So in other words, if you ask people, if you did the social science, most people would say they want to be happy. I'm sure of this. If I ask you, I don't know, there are 90 of you in the room this morning. If I ask you how many of you want to be happy, I suspect that most of you would say, yes, you'd like to be happy. And then if I asked you, well, what are you going to do with that happiness? Are you going to use it for something? You probably would consider it, as Aristotle does, a kind of silly question. Because if we're happy to be happy. We're happy for its own sake. Yeah, that means it's a perfect example of an inherent good. We don't want to be happy because, oh, now I have happiness, I'm going to use it for something else. We're going to be happy for its own sake and not for the sake of something else. So it's purely inherently good. And then Martine asked, what then is happiness? Oh, David asks, well, what then is happiness? Well, give him a chance to explain. Well, that's the purpose, okay, of the ethics, is to first make the point that happiness is ultimately the thing that almost everybody wants, and also it's a thing we want for its own sake. And how to be happy is the next part of the book. So please bear with us, okay? It doesn't have to be David in order for us to be happy. It doesn't, it's not something you can put on a scale or count. It's something, indeed, that's not quantifiable, but it is qualifiable, and he'll give us the key to that. So other things that we desire, such as honor, pleasure, intelligence, or other virtues we desire, every virtue we desire is partly for their own sakes, but partly as a means to happiness. So happiness, on the other hand, nobody desires for the sake of other things, nor indeed as a means to anything else at all. So it's an ultimate goal. If you're truly happy in that sense, then there's really nothing else that you want. I mean, you may need to eat still every day and sleep every day and so forth. But if you're actually happy, then you've achieved something that is inherently good and is not for you a means to any other end. So that's the Aristotelian view. Now, he is going to distinguish something here that he calls the soul, the human soul. And this is not a religious conception of the soul. The Greeks were, we would today call these Greek philosophers pagans, because they had a different view of the soul. And their view is that it's a kind of secular soul, not a divine soul that comes from God. It's a secular conception. And there are different, it's a complicated subject, but Aristotle, for the most part, thinks there are three aspects to the human soul. All right, three main aspects, and that we incorporate in ourselves the aspect of the vegetative, the aspect of the animalistic, and the aspect of the rational. So by the vegetative, he means the idea of nutrition and reproduction. You could almost think of that as instinctive. By the animalistic, he means that we can move around and we have great sensory apparatus. We have more senses than a plant. A plant may be phototropic, right, attracted to light, and may manifest negative geotropism. In other words, it grows up against gravity, but it doesn't have five senses as we do, or as other animals do. So the second dimension of the soul for Aristotle is the sensual part, which he really basically associates with the animals. And the third part is rational. We're much more rational, hopefully, than plants and animals. So that's more of a human part. But he thinks we embody all three parts. So these are sort of three parts to the soul. Plato also believes there are three parts to the soul, but Plato's parts are different. But they both agree, and I'm saying this is important, they both agree that, that one of the criteria or one of the ways to become happy is to balance your soul. If people who are unhappy are basically people whose souls are out of balance. Ivana asked, what is the first part of the soul? Well, it's highlighted in the text that I'm sharing with you. It's the part that the plants have. It's called nutritive. Okay, it means basically just being able to thrive and reproduce and nothing else. Okay, nutritive. And the second part is sensual. It's a life of sensation. Animals have this. They move around and desire things. And then the third part is the rational, which is more exclusive to humans. Obedience to reason, being able to reason and use reason as a guide, is something we do more, obviously, than other animals, and plants arguably not at all. So that is one version of Aristotle's three parts of the soul. And so when he talks about the soul, you understand what he means. It's not a religious conception at all. It's a secular or actually scientific conception. So the function of man is an activity of soul in accordance with reason. Okay? An activity. We're always back to this notion of being active, that we're bound to be active. We're bound to do things in life. So it can't be pure contemplation, even though for Aristotle, contemplation is indeed preferable and in some ways superior to chasing pleasure or chasing riches, but it's not enough. We have to be active. So how are we going to be guided in our active? And why is this considered secular philosophy? Because in religions, most religions, the soul belongs to God, or the soul is immortal, or the soul has to be saved, or the soul is divine. That word soul in religious context connects us with divinity, but in secular context, there's no connection to God. Okay? Clear? He's not talking about God when he talks about the soul. And he's not talking about the next life when he talks about the soul. He's not talking about the soul going to heaven. All right? He's not talking about the soul being saved. All right? He's talking about, it's like a scientific assessment. Okay, you're welcome. So it's an activity of the soul. And then we get a definition of goodness, that if you're good, then you are going to conduct activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Or indeed, if there are more virtues than one, in accordance with the best and most complete virtue. And that is basically his definition of goodness, that goodness will be an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. And this will also lead to happiness, back to that earlier question of David's. This is what's going to make you happy. Whereas if you conduct activity of the soul in accordance with vice, then you're going to become unhappy. But it's not this simple in Aristotle. He does something really ingenious that we may get to this day. Or if not, we'll get to it on Thursday, and you'll get to it as well. It's not polar. So we'll come to this, but I'll just mention to you, if you want to just, be aware that I think most of our discussions of ethics, and maybe most of your conceptions of ethics thus far that you have formed or have been taught, you have thought about them in a polar or a bipolar sense. In other words, we're constantly talking about good and evil, right and wrong, justice and injustice. Yes, we're talking about these things as though they were polar opposites. That's our habit, and that's very largely what we've received in terms of theories. People are talking again about right versus wrong, good versus bad or evil, and justice versus injustice. Those are polar, right? Now, Aristotle's concept of virtue is original. It's completely original, because he's going to tell us a different story. He's going to say, and we'll get there. I'm just letting you know that it's coming, that virtue is actually going to be a mean or a balance, that on both sides of virtue are vices. So virtue is not the opposite of vice. Virtue is going to be a moderate path between the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess. In other words, too much of something is a vice, and not enough of something is a vice. Right? Too much is the vice of excess, and not enough is the vice of deficiency. Virtue is going to lie somewhere in the middle. So the art of being virtuous, then, is to conduct an activity of the soul in accordance with finding a balance point between too much and not enough. And that is a very original conception of virtue. And we'll look at some examples. Is that the golden mean? Asks Hannah. Yes, exactly. Good for you. How did you know about the golden mean? Where did you hear about that?
High school history class.
In high school? I'm very happy. I'm very happy they're still teaching that. And which high school was this? Was this in the USA?
Yeah, I went to a private Jewish school. And we
Well,
covered
I'm
it.
glad I'm glad they're still teaching ethics somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and this had a big influence on Western civilization, and as I said as well on Islamic civilization. Judeo-Christian tradition is aware of Aristotle, and so is the Islamic tradition aware of Aristotle. And virtue plays a huge role in all of the ethics of the Abrahamic faiths. They're all virtue ethics in a certain sense too, but Aristotle's secular. So in any case, it's called the golden mean for another reason. I'm glad you used that phrase. That's exactly the right phrase. They taught you well. Aristotle derives this from geometry. The Greeks placed a huge importance on geometry, and Plato, being Aristotle's teacher for something like 15 or 16 years, influenced him also in this vein. Plato had a sign above his academy in Greek, and that sign said, in English, it said, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." The Greeks, and Plato actually taught, Plato believed that nobody should even study ethics and politics until they had studied geometry for about 10 years, because he thought that, in fact, ethics and politics are much more difficult subjects, and that geometry was much more transparently clear and indisputable, and also grounded the mind in logical argument. And it was his hope that if we were good geometers, then we would also be able to measure our conduct. Geometry means measurement of the earth, right? It's the foundational science, the foundational art of many forms of mathematics and also of arts and architecture. Proportion and so forth plays a huge role in all the arts. So geometry is foundational. And Plato thought that if we were good geometers, then we would also learn how to proportion our conduct, how to proportion our laws, how to proportion our society in a pleasing and in an ethical way. So that was the role of Plato thought that citizens who were well balanced aesthetically and geometrically would also be well balanced democratically. So it's really brilliant and original theory considering its antiquity. These philosophers saw way ahead of their time. Aristotle also picked up on this. And so his ethics are, in fact, the ethics of the golden mean. The notion that virtue is a golden mean between two extremes of vice is his ethical rendition of an object we're going to look at on Thursday. And that object is called the golden rectangle. It's a very special object. The Greeks knew about it. It's an extraordinary object. And we'll be studying some of its aesthetic properties to show you the effect that it's had on art. But it also had this effect on Aristotle's ethics, okay? But not all mathematicians are inherently good. That's right, Ahmed. In fact, one of the worst arguments I ever heard about in universities was allegedly an argument in the mathematics department at Berkeley, where apparently one day the mathematicians ended up throwing chairs at each other in a department meeting. That's an apocryphal tale. Mathematicians are very rational. Indeed, they're very rational, but they may in fact be good or wicked morally. And being rational has nothing to do with your goodness or badness, not directly. Okay, let us put it a different way. Being a brilliant mathematician makes no comment upon whether you're morally a good or a bad person. And Aristotle says this right in the next paragraph. So Ahmed, you're right on point, because if we're going to ask what is virtue, okay, if we want now to conduct our activities of the soul in accordance with virtue, we need to understand what virtue is. And so in the next paragraph on the same page, Aristotle addresses this very question that Ahmed is raising, this objection that not all mathematicians are inherently good. Well, they may be capable of goodness, but they may be behaving badly, just as anybody else might. So Aristotle makes this point. Virtue is twofold. Okay, virtue consists of there's two kinds of virtues, intellectual and moral. And intellectual virtue is originated and fostered mainly by teaching. It demands, therefore, experience and time. So in other words, to be a mathematician, you obviously have to put some time into learning mathematics, and you have to attain a certain set of expertise, and those are all intellectual expertise. In fact, everything in the university, whatever program you're in, whatever major you've declared, or whatever subject you're studying, are all exercising your intellectual virtue. Not sports. Sports are exercising physical virtue, but any subject you're studying in a classroom is exercising intellectual virtue. That's not the same as moral virtue, and this is a huge and really important distinction for Aristotle. And it may or may not speak to you, but he's wanting to carve a huge difference between intellectual virtues and moral virtues. Intellectual virtues come from what we learn and our application of our intellects to what we learn, whereas moral virtues, says Aristotle, is the outcome of habit. And accordingly, its name, ethike, is derived by slight variation from ethos, which is habit. And so it follows, and this is really supremely important, this paragraph, it follows that moral virtue is not implanted in us by nature. For nothing that exists by nature can be transformed by habit. You cannot transform the color of your eyes by habit. You could certainly put on different color contact lenses, right? But whatever nature gives you, you cannot, by adopting a different habit, change what nature gives you. You can't change your DNA by habit. Okay, so whatever nature gives us is sort of fixed in a certain way, but our moral dispositions are not. Aristotle believes that our habits are actually up to us in the end of the day. When we're very young, of course, our habits are going to be ingrained in us by others. So the habits we adopt when we're very young are habits that will be instilled in us by whom? By our parents, by our siblings, by our friends, by our schools, our teachers, our society, right? The habits we pick up will be the habits that we tend to adhere to for a long time. And it's much harder to change them later in life, but very easy to adopt habits early in life. In fact, he'll go on to say we're creatures of habit. His point is that a stone, think about it, like being programmed. Yes, like being programmed. Yeah, that sounds a little sinister, but in fact, this is what we do to our children. We're all sort of predisposed. Our big brains are given to us by nature. And if you ask what the purpose of a big brain is, it's to learn. And therefore, we receive a language, a first language, and a culture. And that is a program. It's definitely an operating system. A culture is an operating system. Absolutely. And we're going to learn our morality along with that operating system. So Aristotle's point is that a stone, which he says naturally tends to fall downwards, he didn't have a theory of gravity, but obviously stones, they knew stones fall down by nature, cannot be trained to rise up, right? You could try to train a stone to fall upward, but it's never going to work, right? You could throw a stone up 10,000 times in the air, it's always going to fall down. It's never going to learn to fall upward, yeah? So by nature, you cannot change the way things are, but by habit, you can change the way we are morally. So it's not because of nature or in defiance of nature that virtues grow in us. Nature gives us the capacity to receive them. That's the whole point. We are by nature, in other words, creatures of habit. We are made to adopt habits. And good habits will be called virtues and bad habits will be called vices. And so there's nothing in our natures which tells us that we're good or bad. Yes, nothing in our natures tells us we're good or bad. We're not born good or bad. We're only born creatures of habit. And it's the activity of the soul that we pursue, which will end up helping to make us good or not so good, depending on whether we exercise virtues or exercise vices, okay? This is getting now a clear picture of where he's headed with this. So this is called moral anti-naturalism. I'll just describe moral. That's technically what he is. He's saying that we're not made good or bad by nature. Now, there may be some exceptions. No one's objected yet, but I mean, there may be some people who are incurable psychopaths. Maybe some people who are born, serial killers, or other people seem to be like very far out, to one extreme. So yes, this is what Ahmed is saying. some people are genetically predisposed to have moral disengagement. Yes, that's exactly right. But again, the extent of that is not clear. We're still in muddy water here about nature and nurture, right? How much of antisocial behavior is genetically predisposed? How much of antisocial behavior are people's decisions and habits about their predispositions? To what extent are our predispositions changeable? Aristotle would say that our moral predispositions are almost entirely changeable, unlike the color of our hair, eyes, our body shape, our normal body weight, our height, the number of fingers and toes we have. These things are given by nature and we can't change them, but our moral dispositions basically are malleable for most people. Yes, the more we practice something, the more likely we will succeed at becoming, well, if we practice virtues, I would say it a different way, Maciel. According to Aristotle, the more we practice virtues, the better we become. The more we practice vices, the worse we become. It's not every practice is going to lead you to being virtuous. Practicing virtues will lead you to be happy. Practicing vices will lead you to be unhappy, okay? So just correct that chain of reasoning. We're all going to practice something, but if we practice virtues, we'll be happy. If we practice vices, we'll be unhappy. And if we practice vices, we'll probably make other people unhappy too, okay? So if you want to understand this distinction again, is it possible? Yeah, well, I think that it is. I think that Aristotle is optimistic. Only habits that are deeply ingrained are harder to change, right? Smoking is a habit, right? Basically, whatever else it is. It's easy to start smoking and harder to quit, correct? Most people find it easier to start smoking than to quit smoking, right? So there's something skewed about this playing field. It looks like, unfortunately, the deck is a little bit stacked because it seems that good habits are harder to develop and easier to break, and bad habits are easier to develop and harder to break. So you could say that the moral playing field is not exactly level, but Aristotle wants to paint it for a rational person. It's much more level. Okay, if you're a rational person, then you do have much more control over the habits that you form and persist in. All right, so Aristotle is more egalitarian about this. So in sum, it's, if we know that someone has a PhD in mathematics, Aristotle would say, well, that may be an intellectual virtue, but that doesn't tell us whether they're a good or a bad person morally. We can conclude nothing from their intellectual accomplishments. Just the same as we can't conclude, if I tell you someone is tall or someone is short, or someone is overweight or someone is underweight, or someone has green eyes or someone has blue eyes, this tells us nothing about their moral characters, because all the things that nature gives are absolutely irrelevant to the habits that we acquire or break. And that's where our moral characters are going to emerge from. All right, so let's go on. So because of the necessity of exercising, remember, we are conducting activities here. So for Aristotle, virtue is not a theory, it's a practice. And how do we become brave? We become brave by practicing brave acts. We become temperate, that is moderate, by practicing moderation. These are all practices for Aristotle. And I think there's a bit at the bottom here, very important. We become, see, it's by doing these things that we become good at them, all right? It's by doing that we become good. We study the arts, but we have to practice them. We become builders by building. We become harpists by playing the harp. You could read all the books about how to play the harp. That will not make you a harpist. At the end of the day, you have to practice the harp, right? You could read books on how to build, but if you want to be a builder, at the end of the day, you have to build something. Similarly, it is by doing just acts that we become just. By doing temperate acts that we become temperate. By doing brave acts that we become brave. So whatever you consider to be a virtue, you have to actually practice it. Reading about it or thinking about it is not enough. It is by training in good habits that lawmakers make the citizens good. This is the object of all lawmakers at heart. Question, so when you're morally virtuous, your soul is more balanced. That's right, exactly right. The idea is that by balancing your soul, you're going to be morally virtuous, but it works both ways. If you are morally virtuous, that's definitely evidence for Aristotle that your soul is balanced. So this is the thing. And moral states, therefore, are the results of activities. It is our duty, therefore, to keep a certain character in our activities, since our moral states depend on the differences in our activities. So the difference between one and another training and habits in our childhood is not a light matter, but important, or rather all important. So he recognized a long time ago that the habits that we form in childhood are going to be all important, and they're going to be the ones that become most deeply ingrained and ultimately may be the hardest ones to break later in life, just in case we pick up bad habits and want to change them. On the other hand, if we develop good habits at an early age, then they will serve us in good stead throughout life. The Jesuits famously said, give me the child until the age of 7, and I will answer for the adult. In other words, if they had control of the education of the child for the first 7 years, they could instill virtues that would last a lifetime, and then they could say, we'll be answerable for what this person does as an adult, because we believe that this formative period, especially the first 7 years of life, is extremely important in the formation of moral habits, okay? But they can be changed, yeah? It's just more difficult as we get older, all right? So, this is where now he begins to articulate what Hannah has earlier identified correctly as the golden mean. And this is the first point on page 320, that deficiency and excess are both fatal. So in questions of health and strength, for example, if you're an athlete, you know that too much exercise will actually injure you. You'll get hurt if you do too much, but not enough will simply not develop you. Similarly, too much or too little meat and drink is fatal to health. You eat too much, you'll be unhealthy. If you don't eat enough, you'll be unhealthy. So it's the same thing with the moral virtues. Exactly. The things that sustain us physically need also to be practiced or consumed in moderation. And it's the same with the moral virtues. They need to be exercised in moderation. So, for example, a person who avoids and is afraid of everything and faces nothing becomes a coward. Yes, a coward is not someone who feels fear. Brave people feel fear, but they're not paralyzed when they have to act. That's the difference. Whereas a person who is not afraid of anything is actually reckless and therefore dangerous. Yes, that's the extreme. So if we consider that courage is a virtue, which it was for the Greeks, I'll type that in. Courage is a virtue, right? For the Greeks, courage is a virtue, definitely. Okay, so then too much or too little, let's say, too little courage is a vice, namely the vice of what we call cowardice, right? We call that the vice of cowardice. People who are afraid to act when they have to act. Too little courage is a vice of cowardice, but also too much is a vice on the other side. The golden mean is courage. Too little is cowardice. Too much courage, literally, excess courage, which we don't usually think about. Excess courage, too much courage, is the vice of recklessness. Right? Recklessness. Reckless driving, for example. Recklessness. Okay? So this is the first introduction to this thing called the golden mean. That virtue is going to be somewhere in the middle. Not too much and not too little. And every virtue that we can identify will also be able to be tabled in this way on this schema, so that for each virtue or for each quality that we believe is virtuous, we should be able to identify an extreme of excess, which will be too much of it, and an extreme of deficiency, which will be too little of it. Okay, let's take another example. We've looked at the example of courage. So another thing that the Greeks thought was virtuous was wisdom. That was another virtue. Okay, wisdom. So what will we call someone? Usually we have less trouble identifying a deficiency, and we have to get used to thinking about the other side of it, where there's too much. If wisdom is a virtue, What would not enough wisdom be called? What someone who lacks wisdom, what might they be called? What's the name for a lack of wisdom? Foolishness, yes, right, exactly. It's like the opposite, what we generally think of as the opposite of wisdom, right? Folly, right? So not enough wisdom is folly or idiocy, sure. What about too much? Okay, that's not what we're not used to thinking this way, so it's a good challenge. What's too much wisdom? What would we call that? Someone who's too wise or thinks they're too wise. Arrogance, very good. I think that's one. Yes, I think that's one. Exactly. Very good. Arrogance. Yes, someone who thinks they're wiser than everybody else. Yes, pride, a certain kind of arrogant pride. The Greeks didn't think pride was bad, but they have another word for arrogant pride, and that's a word we use in English too. It's called hubris. Right. So that's too much. That's arrogant pride that leads to inevitably to a fall. Aristotle would say you should take a healthy pride in what you do well. But arrogant pride, haughtiness, yes, that's another way of looking at it, okay? Or, superiority complex, right? Someone who thinks they're better, they're wiser, right? So that's very good that you picked out those things, all right? Or condescending to others, yes, that would be excessive. People who are wise are also humble and not condescending, yeah? Did the Greeks believe wisdom could be inherited? That's a really great question, Hillary, and we're going to look at that. Can you hold that question until next week when we look at Plato? Because this is going to be a huge, I'm really glad you asked. This is one of the huge cutting points. It's one of the reasons primarily why Aristotle was not named as Plato's successor. And I'll give you the short answer. It's a great question. I can't resist answering it. You see, Aristotle is telling us that virtues are like habits. So all virtues that Plato and Aristotle would identify, such as courage, wisdom, temperance, justice, all those virtues that they would agree on are virtues, they would disagree on the origin of them. Aristotle says they're habits. They have to be practiced. They're activities of the soul, and we have to practice them. In order to be just, we have to practice justice. Plato, on the other hand, had a totally different theory. He believed that they're actually innate, that we are actually born with these things, but they have to become manifest. We have to realize their existence within us in order to manifest them in our lives. And that's a very, very different story. Okay, so Plato's ethics are really different than Aristotle's. Okay, but great question. And we'll get there next week. So let's stay with Aristotle. What about justice? What would we say, since that's a big question in every generation, particularly a big question these days? So what do we call an absence of justice? If something is not, we would say corruption could be an absence of justice, yes. Not
injustice.
Fair, or injustice, right? An absence of justice, we could say, is injustice. Yes, we would say if it's unjust, there isn't enough justice. We would say injustice. All those things that you're saying. What about too much? And again, we don't often think about the other vice. What about too much justice? How would that look? Or you could also say that not enough justice might be anarchy. But what about too much? What about too much? What would it look like if there were too much justice? No, revenge is perhaps taking justice into your own hands. Socialism, that's very political. The military state, yes, I think that's closer. If you're think about it this way: if your justice system is too empowered, if your justice system has powers over people that are too much, then it might become a totalitarian state, for example, or a police state, right? A police state would be a state in which justice has too much power. Okay, so that's a very interesting, important question, and I think it pertains to all kinds of situations, in certainly in human history and in revolutionary causes and all kinds of things. So I just want you to think about it, okay? Because for every virtue, there have to be these two extremes of vice. Every virtue that Aristotle identifies always has one extreme of deficiency, which is a vice, and another extreme of excess, which is likewise a vice. Whereas we have to find the moderate way, or the middle way, or the golden mean in Aristotle's case. Now, he's going to give us a different conception of what virtue is, and it's really a moral state. It doesn't belong to our emotions. It doesn't belong to our faculties. So he talks about the soul in now three different ways, not the vegetative, the sensitive, and the rational, but now in three different ways: the emotional, and the which are the emotions that we feel, and the faculties, which is actually our capacity to feel them, and then the moral states, which is our dispositions and what we do about feeling them. So virtues and vices are not emotions and not faculties. For Aristotle, they're actually going to be moral states, okay? And we're not praised or blamed, for example, for having emotions, right? We're not praised or blamed for having faculties, but we're definitely praised or blamed for our virtues or our vices, and therefore those things are moral states. Now, this is where he evolves the golden mean, right? This is where you're going to see now the influence of geometry on his moral theory. He says, now of everything, whether it be continuous or divisible, it is possible to take a greater, a smaller, or an equal amount. Now we're talking about things that are quantifiable, okay? The equal being a mean between too much and too little. The mean in terms of the thing itself is that which is equally distinct. If we're talking about arithmetic means, then they're equally distinct from both extremes, right? For example, we could, if 10 is too much and 2 is too little, we could take 6 as a mean, right? 10 plus 2 divided by 2 would give us 6. So it would be equidistant. 6 is as far from 2 as it is from 10. So it's actually an arithmetic mean, and that's fine. But the mean considered in ourselves cannot be reckoned in that simple arithmetic way, because how much should you eat? Well, it doesn't mean if 10 pounds is too much and 2 pounds is too little, then you should eat 6 pounds. For each of us, we have to find our own mean. How much do you sleep at night? I'll bet that each of you sleep slightly different amount for you to be, considered to have had a good night's sleep. That number is not going to be the same for everybody. How many calories do you need in a day? That number is not going to be the same for everybody. So the amount of exercise that you need, the amount of food you need, the amount of sleep you need is not going to be quantifiable exactly in the way that arithmetic means are quantifiable. So it's more of a qualitative or a judgment call. And so that means that the virtuous mean that we choose is going to be relative to ourselves and not relative to some absolute mathematical number. Can't be that way with virtue. Okay, that's quite important. So the amount of sleep that's virtuous for you is going to be different from all others, but it's still virtuous. And similarly with food, and similarly with the actions that we call virtues in themselves, such as courage, or temperance, or justice, or wisdom. So he also goes on to say, and very importantly, that not everything that's done in moderation is virtuous. There are definite exceptions to this rule. This is an overall view. I'm not sure what Hillary's question is. Aristotle is just arguing that the actual amounts that are proper for each of us, for example, how much exercise, how much sleep, how much food, these are relative to us. But not everything is virtuous just because it's done in moderation, and he's very quick to point this out. It's never possible, for example, he says, to be moderate and therefore virtuous in adultery. There are a number of actions which are always going to be considered to be wrong. He names them a little bit later. Murder, theft, calumny, adultery. He says these things are always sinful. They're always wrong. You cannot say, well, I committed a virtuous amount of adultery and therefore it's okay. Or I committed a virtuous amount of murder, not too much, not too little, therefore it's okay. These are exceptions. There are some things that can never be right. So these are exceptions to the rule, okay? And then Aristotle also comes out with something, and I'll bet you've all heard of this, the expression, the lesser of two evils. Because sometimes, in fact, we don't have a good choice. Sometimes there are dilemmas that arise, and we don't really have a good choice or a moderate choice. So in that case, Aristotle says we should do the least worst thing. If you're confronted with a dilemma and both choices are bad, you should choose the one that's least bad, right? And that's called the lesser of two evils. Hopefully we don't encounter that very much. But these kinds of things are exceptions to his virtue ethics. There are certain actions which are in and of themselves right or wrong. So the 2012, well, okay, there you go. So that's basically, you got to choose, if you think that's the case with the 2020 election. I think it was, if that's the case, then you have to choose the lesser of two evils, okay? That's why Churchill said that democracy is the worst form of government, okay? He said, democracy is the worst form of government. He said, except for all the other ones. So basically, okay, let's not get too political today. We'll have a chance to do this as the election gets closer. Let's just stick a little longer with Aristotle. I'm glad you're thinking about how this applies or doesn't apply to the present situation. Okay, so to summarize, there are three dispositions, two being vices, namely excess and deficiency, and one virtue, which is the mean between them. Okay, and in that sense, they're all mutually opposed. So that, I think we've accomplished quite a bit today. And that's, I think, enough for us for today. You can read ahead if you like. We're almost at the end of this chapter, actually, or of this extract. But I'm going to show you, those who were in my section M on Thursday, we're going to look very specifically at how geometry itself influenced this. I have some slides to show you, and I'll show them to you on Thursday. But also that will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So those of you who are going to be in breakout groups with other instructors and continuing your discussion of Aristotle, you're obviously free and cordially invited to make time to watch these other breakout lectures that I upload to YouTube. Okay, those in section M will see them. The rest of you may see them too at your convenience. So are there any questions now about this, what we've covered today? We have a few minutes left, and I'll be happy to. I really like what you've chimed in with, a lot of really good comments, a lot of really good questions, a lot of repartee back and forth, and you've all kept your sense of humor this morning, which, that's a good thing. Don't lose that. That's also a virtue, I think, right? I mean, Aristotle doesn't list it as one, but if we consider it on Aristotle's theory, some people are humorless, right? Some people never laugh, and that would probably be a vice. That would be the excess of deficiency. And what about people who laugh at everything? They find everything funny. I think not everything is funny. So people who laugh at absolutely everything probably are committing the other vice, right? Not deficiency, but too much. Okay? But laughing, in a moderate way is probably a good thing. Arguably a good thing. Any questions about what we've covered? We've done quite a bit this morning, as I hope we would. So any questions about this?
Professor, I have a question real quick.
Sure.
So according to Aristotle, a vice isn't necessarily something bad. It's just too much or too little of anything.
But it's not too much or too little of anything, but it's too much or too little of the things that we consider to be virtues. And the result is that if we do something either in excess or with deficiency, it will make us unhappy. It's an activity of the soul. Remember, it's a habit. So if we get into a habit of eating too much, we'll end up unhappy. If we get into a habit of not eating enough, we'll end up unhappy. If we work too hard, if we get into a habit of becoming workaholics, we'll end up unhappy. If we get into a habit of not working enough and becoming lazy, for example, or procrastinators, then we'll be unhappy. Remember that there's a goal. These virtues are things which, if practiced assiduously, lead to happiness, which is, remember, the highest, for Aristotle, the thing we value most for itself and not for something else. And virtue is like the recipe, if you like. Practicing virtues becomes the recipe for attaining happiness in Aristotle's ethics. So that's the importance of finding that golden mean. Not too much or not too little will make you happy. Too much or too little will make you unhappy. Okay? You're smiling already, so you must be happy. Okay, that's a good thing. Any other questions? You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, somebody says, I know no balance. I live life on the extremes. Well, Aristotle would say, good luck. I mean, it's Maybe you're happy so far. Maybe it's working for you so far. Maybe you're the exception to the rule, Alejandra. I don't know, but surely you don't do everything on the extremes. I mean, you hopefully you don't do everything on the extremes. There must be some balance in your life. Maybe you haven't thought about it. Hopefully there is. Do these rules apply to society as a whole? Excellent question. Well, Lenise, look, the idea is that these rules apply to individuals. And in this view of Aristotle, the individual is the atom of society, right? Society is like the molecule or the big compound formed of all the atoms, who were all atoms. And so what Aristotle's implying by this is that if we have enough just people, if we have a moral majority, if we have a majority of people in a society who are acting justly, who have practiced the virtue of justice and who practice it daily, then that will be inevitably a just society. If you have a majority of people who are behaving unjustly, then it's going to be an unjust society. So the justice of a society will be governed partly by the character of the moral majority of the citizens, and also, hopefully, that they will elect, if it's a democracy, a leader who reflects back to them the balance that they themselves are practicing. Otherwise, there will be political problems, undoubtedly. So society is going to be a function, the justice or the goodness of a society will be a function of the sort of a sum over the justice and goodness of the majority of its members. Remember, the Greeks invented democracy. So they were very sensitive to this. And that was the importance of turning out what they called, good citizens. Because if you have enough good citizens, you're going to have a good society. At least that's the theory. Do I know of any other inherently good thing? Well, that's a very good question. We'll leave it for next day, okay? Will, yes. Well, that's will. Having a good will is definitely inherently a good thing. I would say, and Immanuel Kant would say, it's the only good thing. But we'll get to him in week 4. Okay, we'll get to answer that question, where Kant says the only good thing is a good will. So for Kant, the will is inherently good if it's good, okay? But it's also possible to have a bad will, unfortunately. In any case, I think it's been a very constructive and mission accomplished this morning. Anyway, I'm glad to have had a chance to go over this with you. We'll talk about John Stuart Mill in the last lecture in the next 5 weeks. Mill will get his turn. So I'm going to, of course, upload this to YouTube so you can watch it again if you want to. And those of you who are absent obviously will get a chance to watch it for the first time. So I apologize for the speed bump at the beginning. I'll just repeat. Those of you in section M, that's my breakout group, your first essay is due on Monday the 12th. Those of you who have breakout groups with other instructors, they are evaluating you in their own ways, so that's independent of what I'm doing. If you're not in my section, don't worry, okay? Just do what your instructors say, and all will be well. But anyway, pleasure seeing you all this morning. Thank you very much for your participation. Very spirited. Appreciate it. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday when we deal with Plato. And those of you in section M, I'll see you again on Thursday. But I will also upload again today's as well as Thursday's lecture. Okay? So have a great day, everybody. Be well. Take care. Have a nice day. Thank you very much. And bye for now.
Bye, Professor.
Thank you, you too.
Okay.